Hey, welcome to Adoption Now. I'm your host, April Fallon. Okay, so you know we love to share perspectives at Adoption Now, and today we have such a great episode. Emily Chapman Richards is the daughter of Steven Curtis Chapman, a well-known Christian recording artist. She has 3 children with her husband, Tanner, and she's the advisor and ambassador of Show Hope, an organization that has helped, listen to this, over 9,000 children find permanent placement from around the world. Emily was a young girl and she went to her parents and she asked them to adopt. I'm not sure that they were ready, but this is a perspective of a biological sibling that helped bring home 3 children from China. I wanted to know, what were her responsibilities and how did her parents prepare her? I can't wait for you to hear Emily's story.
At the end of the day, choose you.
I want to get right into you and I chatting and just talking about how we both have this heart for adoption. We both have this heart to see families that are adopting, but also have healthy placements, right? We want to see that adoption is successful, not only starting, but all the way through. And I know that you're really passionate about that. So I do want to talk about all the wonderful things that you're doing. But first, I want to talk about the perspective of a biological sibling. I think this might be one of the first times we've had a biological sibling on the show to talk about your experience in adoption. So how old were you when your parents started adopting?
My parents, I was 13 when my first sister came home from China. So I have 2 biological brothers that are closer in age to me. And then there's kind of a little bit of an age gap. And I was 13, 17, and 18 when my sisters came home from China.
Okay. Can you go back to 13-year-old Emily? Tell me what she was thinking.
13-year-old Emily was really, really excited. So if you were to ask my parents, they would say that adoption was my idea. In our family. So if I go back to 11-year-old Emily, I had the privilege of taking a trip with my mom out of the country to Haiti. And I was really impacted at a young age to experience life in a different world, in a different country, and kind of trying to come to terms with the experience of some of my friends and peers I met while I was in Haiti. And just realizing so much of what I took for granted that I didn't even realize as an 11-year-old. Home, family, education, clean clothes, food,
right?
Just the security of so much of what we enjoy. We came home from that trip and we were part of a small group at church that foster care and adoption was very ingrained into the fabric of this small group that my parents were a part of. And we had always been kind of on the periphery, encouraging and supporting families that were caring for children through adoption and foster care, caring for, biological parents that were in the kind of navigating placement plans and just lots of, I see images and sort of stories coming back to me. But it was from that trip I really began to talk to my parents and prayerfully ask them to prayerfully consider if we could grow our family through adoption. And that was not an idea that was on the table. Really? So it was a couple of years of, they were incredibly supportive and with their time and their resources for other families. But my dad is a Christian recording artist. He was very busy on the road. My mom had 3 young children at home. It just kind of wasn't in the picture. And God and his faithfulness kind of kept after our family and my parents, and long sordid tale, but the Lord was really gracious to bring my parents together, and they began the process in the late 90s. And in 2000, my sister Shoei came home from China, and we weren't even home from that trip. And my parents were like, yeah, we're going to go back. We're going to go back. There's gotta, yeah. So that was Stevie Joy's arrival. And then Maria found her way to our family as well.
All right, let's talk about those first couple days and weeks when you brought Shoei home. What was that like? I mean, I know that people are listening right now, and we have children, right, that are the age that you're bringing these children home. And you kind of want to get into their head, right? You want to know, like, is it okay? Are you okay? Because it changes a lot. So let's talk about, the whole family dynamic changes. Let's talk about those changes.
one thing I'm really, really thankful for in looking back. My parents were really communicative to us throughout the process. And it wasn't always sunshine and rainbows, you know, like, especially for me, who was really passionate about this idea and really wanted, you know, top of my Christmas list, getting in the mindset of an 11-year-old was a baby sister. And like, okay, that's kind of, Santa can't bring that. And so my parents, they were very communicative throughout the process, and I think helped to manage expectations, which I think was really helpful and set us up for success in those early days. Up until, and my mom's written a book. It's called Choosing to See, Mary Beth Chapman. She writes really openly in her book about, she really wrestled with, I think, a lot of the questions that adoptive parents that are considering foster and adoption may find themselves asking. Will I be able to love a child that enters my home through adoption like my biological children? What will that be like? You know, some of those questions that you may feel crazy asking when you're in the middle of it, but they're really kind of just human questions. And she, even up until the moment we received my sister, Shoei, in that hallway in that hotel in China, was talking us through, like, I am walking this in faith because I do believe that as a family, as people of faith, as Christians, that we have been called and really invited in to experience more of God and his character in that. There was this foundation of like faith there. There was this foundation of we are in this together, and expectations being managed. Like, when Shoei comes home, we're going to be in this together, meaning there might be sacrifices on the weekend because we just can't get everybody everywhere because we've got a new baby and we're navigating those early days of attachment and bonding. And we need to be really mindful of who is in kind of our core group. And again, this was 20 years ago. So even conversations around healthy attachment and bonding were just beginning to be on the radar. But thankfully, in God's kindness, I mean, we again, through experiences of close family friends, knew to be aware of that. And so there was, again, I think that open conversation and the managing of the expectations of like, we're going to expect you guys once every, weekend, one weekend out of the month to be the ones that get up with Shoei on Saturday when it's age appropriate, right? And have her for cartoon time.
You were probably like, I'm in. I'm signed up.
And I had my brother sign a contract. So we were good.
That's hilarious. They had to be committed too. How old was she when you brought her home?
Shoei was 7 months old.
Oh my gosh, baby. Did she attach right away?
Yeah, she did. I mean, I think it would be probably more appropriate to ask her her perspective. But,
well, I mean, I don't know that she would answer at 7 months, but and I guess you're a little kid, so you really don't know like what attachment really is, Yeah. But I guess some of the questions are, was she crying a lot? Did she feel distant? Did you sense any sort of grief?
Oh, yes. So Shoei, and again, I look back, I'm like, oh my goodness, so much of this was just coming on the radar. But my mom like dyed her hair jet black, like just things to try to help because in holding and making eye contact and bottle feeding, and so much of those repetitive motions that we know in those early days and months, and trying to recover some of what maybe wasn't there in those first 7 months of I cry, you come, I cry, you come, I cry, you come, and helping really substantiate the fact that you have voice and you matter and we can help work together to get your needs met, right? So there were really, and I look back and I'm like, as funny as it is to say, there were really intentional decisions on my parents' part to do the best they could with the information they had at hand. Was there a grief? Yes. Of the three girls, I can remember most vividly Shoei's transition into our family, some night terrors and hours at nighttime, just holding and praying over her and being the ones that kind of constantly, particularly my mom, of course, is the primary attachment figure, just helping meet those needs. But I do have memories of that. And I have memories of watching my mom sit in the rocker with tears just streaming down her face, saying, you're safe, you're safe, you're safe here. And it's been a remarkable journey to watch Shoei come into her own self within the love and acceptance of our family.
Yeah. I think it's important to say, we say a lot here, love does not cover everything, right? It's not the end all be all, but man, does it help? If you go into it knowing that your responsibility as an adoptive parent, especially in international adoption and foster care, is you have a role in a child's healing. And healing takes time, and healing takes commitment, right? And it's not always a child wraps, their arms around your neck and you're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Sometimes it's work to get healing and trust back in to this relationship because this child has not had that from the very beginning. And I'm just so happy hearing your story because it sounds like your parents were not in shock about the things that they were committing to.
Yeah, they went in with eyes wide open. And we've all still been surprised. Like it's the both and of you work your best to be educated and prepared for something that you're leading your family into and inviting a child into, right? Like to show up to be the best version for Shoei and myself and Caleb and Will, and then furthermore Stevie Joy and Maria, and yet the ability to have grace and humility to learn how to adapt when things also don't go according to plan. It's kind of that both and a little bit,
Right. It's really teaching just this depth of our faith that I feel like as a person who's gone through it so many different times as a mother, I don't know that I would know this part of the Lord as I do now that I walk through it, right? There's this like depth that came out of my faith, but also things that he had put inside of me that I didn't know I had. I really didn't even think I could take care of a plant. And here I am like in the midst of like a baby, that's sick or, dealing with adoptive, other adoptive parents or other people in the church. I mean, all the things that come with just the journey, right? Even biological, in our case, biological parents. And I just was so filled with fear that I didn't know if I could do it. And I could. And that's my encouragement to so many families is I know that there's this level of fear or the unexpected, but you will be very surprised at what God has already put inside of you to accomplish this. And that's why the calling is so important. That's why the invitation is so important. You have to know that you're invited to this, right? And when you start to understand that you are and you start to wake up to that and you're like, I think we're supposed to do that, just as your parents did, you'll be surprised at what's the seeds that are already in there that are growing. And I just want to encourage you. It sounds like you guys walked through so much. Let's talk about baby number 2. Let's talk about Stevie Joy.
Stevie Joy?
Yeah.
Oh, totally. Well, let me just remark on that briefly.
Yes.
I feel like maybe you called my parents ahead of this interview. I'm like, you're saying exactly what I've heard them say for so many years. My parents have always phrased the idea of being involved with caring for children through adoption and foster care as an invitation to understand the heart of God and in a new and deeper level. And not in a way that's like, if you don't move toward adoption and foster care, there will be other ways. I mean, God is pursuing us so particularly. There will be other ways in which we're invited to experience the heart of God. But this is one way, and it is an invitation. It's not a coercion or something.
Right.
And there's a freedom in that invitation to then, when the days look different, to experience your reliance on the Lord and ask to be able to kind of lean into those spaces and see what the good gifts he's already put in you to help meet the needs of these little kiddos. So anyways, just thankful for that from you. Yes, baby number 2, Stevie Joy, she came home in, I guess, let's see, her birthday. Yeah, she came home in 2003 and she was also 7 months old. Stevie's story, she was really tiny when we got her. So she came right at the tail end before China temporarily ceased intercountry adoptions due to the SARS outbreak in the early 2000s. So we're really grateful that we were able to bring her home before the halt. And I say that with a lot of sensitivity to the current situation in which there's nearly 300 families that are matched with children in China and find themselves in an excruciatingly long and indefinite wait to finalize those adoptions. And so I say that I don't want to not acknowledge that, but she did come home right before a temporary cessation of intercountry adoptions then. And we're really grateful because she was really sickly when she came home. She was 12 pounds, so she was just a tiny tot at 7 months. Yeah. And now part of that is nature. She's now 22 and 4'8", so she's just a tiny tot.
Yeah.
And has kind of found her love in cheerleading and was on Team USA as a little flyer. So she's figured out how to use her tininess for her great strength. And anyways, so yeah, similarly, I mean, we were all on board, us and the siblings, and excited. And she, thinking back to her early days with us, they're not as clear as the early days with Shoei. So I can't really speak to what early bonding and attachment looked like for her.
Why do you think that is?
I'm not sure. Maybe life was a little crazier. We had 2 little kids in the house, and I was maybe my attention was more helping with Shoei, since she would have been a little older, and kind of freeing up time for Mom with Stevie Joy. But again, I carted him. I mean, I had him all the time. Like, at that point I was driving, so I would help Mom when I could, taking them to dance or whatnot. And so I have lots of memories of when she's a little bit older, like just doing fun, being the fun sister to just try to connect. And we have a great relationship, both Shoei and Stevie Joy. We have a great relationship.
I think that you were such a special kid. First of all, I just want to say that, because you were in it as a little person. Like, you really knew that you were called to this and that you were in the glory of it, right? Because there is a glorious part about adoption that I don't want to overlook when we tend to go to the hard things of adoption, because there is the moment where you brought home your child. You went through all the paperwork, you did all the things, you traveled or you went to where you needed to go, and you jumped through all these hoops. And finally that day comes that you bring this child home. And even though what might be on the horizon might be hard, there is a glorious moment of victory when you bring that child home. And you were in that, right? Lots of kids want to have that moment. But then the after of the attachment and the health pieces and all the ways that, your life changes, right? You can't go out as much as you thought you could. Or maybe, I've had families say, we used to have these one big parties like every year, but the adopted kids, like, it was traumatizing to them. So we had to cancel that party. And then the bio kids were disappointed. And I mean, I've heard various stories like that through these years. And I just feel like for you, you were really okay with that change. And I really I think it's part of your personality, but also I think that having that conversation, that real conversation to say, this is going to change our church going, or this is, you might not be able to make every single event, like you said, and sitting down and actually saying that to your family, and then listening to your biological kids. And if they're like, I don't want that, then praying, if you really feel as a parent that God is calling you to this, pray until your child can understand the calling and be on board. Because what we see with some biological children is that the trauma of bringing home children also gives them secondary trauma, right? And then we see them kind of reeling from like, I didn't know, what's going on? And so how do we even prepare the biological children to be healthy as well? And it sounds like you had a good understanding. What about your brothers?
My brothers, so they were obviously younger. And again, I think it was just part of the culture and fabric of so many of the relationships that we were a part of at that time, and conversation. So I think, they just jumped on board. They're incredible big brothers to their little sisters. Sure, there's been sacrifices that have had to be made, but there's just been this sense that we're kind of all in it together. And I, again, I think my parents' openness in conversation, but also they framed a lot of their conversation with us. Like, we are all in this together, and this is a lifetime commitment. And so I think I told you in one of our first conversations, like, it is one of my greatest honors in my life to be the big sister to my sisters. And I even take that and think through that really intentionally now as a mother myself. And again, obviously keeping right priorities right, but how do I show up intentionally for my sisters? How am I present? What does it mean to champion them and what they love? And I think me and my brothers have tried to do that age appropriately as we could throughout the years. And again, I recognize our story is very different, as each family's story is, right? But they yeah, I have memories. They learned how to make bottles, and I don't know that they learned how to change diapers necessarily, but they got right in there wrestling and having fun, and it's kind of like we just never knew life without Shoei and then Stevie and Maria for the time that the Lord had her with us.
Mm-hmm. I think that you guys coming together as a family is so important. I often hear, and maybe you can speak to this, but I often hear that the children that come home actually attach to the siblings first.
Yeah, I could see that. Maybe are those children that are older?
Yeah, or if they had, no, some of them have been babies and just have gone to, the teenage daughter first before they attach to mom. I don't know if because they were younger, maybe they felt a connection.
Yeah. That's interesting. I haven't thought of that, but I could totally see how that I've heard, and had plenty of conversations about mom versus dad and just the inherent struggles there within. But that would add an interesting element. I will say, particularly my sister Shoei, she would say that I think I'm a mentor for her, right? So I think there is a lot of, and even because of the age gap, my parents and there is a little bit, as she's gotten older, even of tag teaming kind of through those teenage years, not parenting, but how you remember back to those days, like you just had certain conversations that you felt more comfortable with. And so trying to also be mindful of that responsibility and not in a way that's triangulating that, but just, okay, how do I, if we all have kind of this invisible bucket, how do we drop positive into that bucket with our conversations and our interactions? And I think that's a beautiful thing that siblings can be, although I could see how it could get, that could be interesting to navigate and I could see how that would happen. A child comes into a home and, kind of gravitates toward a sibling. That would put a responsibility that would feel weighty as a kid, I think.
Yeah, I always say, because parents will ask me, like, is this okay? And honestly, I have seen a good transition if there's not triangulating and all of those things. But yes, like at first, they're scared. They're leaving a culture. They're leaving caregivers that they have attached to. And this is a scary time. And so if they see a little person that they kind of feel more comfortable with, and then they can gravitate towards parents, right? Because you are biological and you have been raised by your parents. So you are going to respond to your parents in the correct way. So you're like that example, and they will follow you and eventually get to the parent.
Yeah.
Not that the sibling would raise like, oh, they're attached to me. I guess I'm the mom now. But just like this is a safe place at first. And you do transition into the parents, but not to be alarmed about that or try to, force your way in as a mom and say, no, I need the baby. I mean, you'll know what to do. You'll feel it out. But I think that one of my most favorite things about my own children that I have learned is that when we do anything with adoption or anything in life that might be different, let's say we're serving, every one of my children has to have a role that's individual to them. And if I don't do that and I just blanket over and say, we're doing this thing, inevitably one of them is like, bleh. And it's always different. But that's the fun thing of having four. And if I can individually say, like, this could be your role, or when we get there, I know that you're a little bit shyer, so you're going to work in the back handing out, I remember like we handed out toys or whatever. And so these roles that they play are so important. And I think that biological children oftentimes don't realize the role that they're playing is so important. You did, and we're working on that training now, right? But it's not just about the mom and dad. If you have biological children, those children are going to play such an important role in this child's development and healing. And, you might not know what that is exactly, but really honoring that, because every person in the family is important, right? And really listening to everybody in the family. And it just sounds like you're such a great example of how to, train your children and how to help them walk through after children come home, that they didn't lose any importance. And I know that you guys got your parents just got like ignited with adoption, right? And so they went to go adopt a third child. Let's talk about her.
Yes. So my sister, Maria, came home in 2004. She came home just a couple weeks before I actually left for college. So I had a short season with her the summer before I left for college. And how she came to our family is a miracle in and of itself. My dad had been visiting. He had visited China to encourage some of our friends that were doing work on the ground there, and had met a family of faith that was there at the time serving and fostering. And they were in the process to adopt one of the little girls they were fostering. And my dad actually had the privilege of meeting Maria and said, "This is Maria, and she needs a family." And my mom had given him strict orders. No, just go to China and come back. And years ago, when I was in kindergarten, I had a little friend in kindergarten named Maria that came from a really difficult story. And my dad had written a song called "Who's Gonna Love Maria?" And so obviously in this moment, those lyrics kind of came flooding back. And so he made the phone call back home, and Mom's like, "Don't even think about it." But by the time he got home from China, my mom had already started preliminary paperwork. And so we welcomed Maria home in the summer of 2004, and she was with us until her untimely passing in 2008. And so, yeah, we obviously that was not in the plans. And so when we talk about thinking we were so sure and certain of a calling, and we walked in faith in that. And then for the story to look very differently, and how we navigate that, and kind of sort of secondary trauma right on top of, especially for my youngest sisters, on top of the loss of their first family, now the loss of a sibling. And that really has solidified our family in the last 16, 17 years to really we say we're together, we're hobbling as best we can. We hope we are hobbling well toward a day when we know we'll see Maria again. Every day it's not a day further from her, it's a day closer to her.
I love that perspective, and I love that you stayed together, because something like that could really break a family, right? And the fact that you guys came out and still felt called to it, it just reminds me of really when the scripture talks about when you go through the fire, what is really of God will stand. And I think all of us who have been in the adoption world for a while have gone through a fire of some sort that required loss, and it requires, everybody's looking at you already, right? And to you guys, so much more. Your dad is a recording artist, and you guys are promoting this, and then you have this very public, tragic thing happen, and everybody's watching you, and really allowing God to bring you through that. And now you're holding something so amazing, and you paid a high price for it. And I don't mean that in like you paid for the tragedy, but like you sacrificed a lot. You chose to stay together. You chose to love each other. And I say this because like I can relate in some ways in the things that we've walked through in adoption now that are so painful. And I watched God really just protect the things that he was doing. And so I can stand here really confidently about the things that our adoption now is doing. Why? Because it went through the fire. I know that God has called me to do these things, right? I know that I know because I watched it stand. And you guys did that too. You went through this thing and everybody's watching you, and it could have just destroyed your family, and it didn't. And yet you still pursue forward, and these two beautiful girls are a part of it. And you took your adoption love and you have started this huge thing with your parents. Let's talk about that.
Yeah. So my parents started an organization, a nonprofit organization, in 2003 called Show Hope. And really, with the Heartbeat, our mission is to care for orphans by engaging the church and reducing barriers to adoption. And the three primary barriers to adoption that we seek to address are the financial, medical, and knowledge barrier. And really, kind of at the cornerstone of the work of Show Hope is the experience that we had as a family welcoming Shoei home. And before we had even made it to our car at the Nashville airport, we had multiple families that had come up to us and said, man, we have room in our hearts and our home. We just don't have the money in the bank account to finalize the process, to be able to do that comfortably and have the resources on hand to provide the necessary support once our child's home, because we understand that will likely be part of this. And so my parents really began at that time in the early 2000s, just personally helping families in their kind of circle and friends, family. I mean, I have multiple cousins that have come home through adoption and close family friends. And my dad liked to joke that my mom could write checks faster than he could write songs. So he said, okay, they were not looking to start something. That's not, what they intended to do. But they had a phone call with a close mentor who leads another very reputable organization, does incredible work. And he said, well, Mary Beth and Steven, if no one is doing this work, providing adoption assistance to Christian families, and you feel like it could be of help to families and children, then maybe you're supposed to do something about it. Oh, okay. So we had a goal, we had a dream to help 100 children come home with the help of an Adoption Aid grant. We've just surpassed awarding 9,100 Adoption Aid grants,
gosh, that's amazing.
Which I think it's well over $45 million that have been deployed in Adoption Aid grants to help 9,100 children from 60 plus countries come home to their family, including here in the United States. And so well beyond what we ever dreamed or imagined, which tells you that the Lord was certainly up to something and has a good sense of humor. And as the work continued to grow, kind of, I really liken it to how each of our families are on their own unique adoption journeys. We learn more, and as we know better, we do better, right? And so we kind of through our history began to understand that many children, particularly intercountry adoptions, many of those children have ongoing medical needs. And so for a period of time, for our organizational history, addressing that medical barrier looked like supporting a network of therapeutic care centers throughout China that we cared for over 2,000 children in that sort of 10 to 12 year period of time that had been orphaned, helped get them therapeutic care, medical intervention to kind of sustain, improve quality of life, sustain life to be able for the adoption process to be completed. Right. We know that about 900 of those children ended up being placed for adoption. Wow. We had to exit that work in around 2020 for obvious reasons, but that has now moved into medical care grants. So we offer medical care grants, and that's a post-finalization grant for families that have brought children home through adoption, whether that's foster to adopt, domestic, intercountry. Once adoption's finalized, obviously have certain criteria, but that can all be found out on Show Up's website. So we now we do medical care grants, which is a recently new program, but again, kind of addressing that medical barrier. And then our third barrier, the knowledge barrier. About 2008, 2010, we met Dr. Karen Purvis and became dear friends with her and her work at the Karen Purvis Institute of Child Development. We miss her dearly. But in that season of time, built a relationship with her in the Institute and began expanding access to trust-based relational intervention. We do that by offering annual training, Hope for the Journey training platform that is available. It's kind of meant to serve as a megaphone, an introduction to TVRI, and get that resource it's specifically geared to church and faith communities. And then we also scholarship professionals to attend trust-based relational intervention training with the Institute. And then our last little program, Student Initiatives, it's our smallest program, but my mom would say one of the most important because our story really began in the heart of myself as a young student. We have resources, small group resources for students to lead either a youth group through or a group of friends that just helps expose to the need of children here in the U.S. and around the world. And it's kind of like a devotional content. It's called the Pause Campaign. And so that's sort of that kind of falls in that knowledge barrier, sort of raising the next generation up to have understanding and awareness and a call to care for the vulnerable.
And let's talk about how much it is. How much is it to adopt?
It can range between $25,000 and $55,000
internationally.
Internationally and domestic now.
Okay, so do you guys give grants for both, or just international?
Yeah.
Oh, you do. Okay, good. We are going to put you. You are in our infant guide as well, because you guys have a How to Adopt. Let's talk about that. That's your new thing.
Yes. So howtoadopt.org is a website that Show Hope owns, edits, curates. And I really love to highlight this resource because I think so many times families that jump in that are interested have the best intentions. And then you go to the internet and it can be so overwhelming.
Right.
And not to mention that it can be designed to give you information that's not helpful sometimes, which that's another conversation. But where do you go to find helpful, credible information that's sort of distilled down in a rubric that you can move through in a helpful way? That's really what our intent in howtoadopt.org has been. And so would encourage any of your listeners that are considering adoption. We walk through foster to adopt, private, domestic, intercountry. What are the different types of adoption? What is going to be involved? Home study, what is that? Questions for interviewing an adoption agency. Like these are things that you might want to consider asking when you consider what adoption agency to go to move forward with, because they're going to be really your companion in this journey. And so it's important. How do you know what to ask for? Understanding fee schedules, all of that information is on howtoadopt.org.
That's great. I have one question for you. Well, I have a million, actually. I always say that. And then I listen. I'm like,
go
I ask
for
like
it.
5
One
more
or
after
a million.
that. One or a million.
Got all day.
Are you going to adopt?
Oh, that's the $1 million question. So my husband and I are open to it. We continue to say, while we believe that biologically we're done building our family, we would obviously never say never to a child that was in need. What my story has looked like, I had the privilege of serving in a leadership role and executive director at Show Hope. So very much so felt that was my commitment and sacrifice even of our family in that season when my kiddos were young. And I still take my role very seriously as big sister through adoption. So that's not part of our story right now, but it's certainly not off the table. But who knows? I've definitely learned never to say never,
right.
And I would love it and would be open to it. But also want to be mindful that we move into that.
Be invited into that, right?
Be invited into it, and we have started paperwork in past years, and the door has not opened, and so we hold it loosely and open. But however we can be a part of. If it's not us that are the adoptive parents, we certainly want to be in the fabric and framework of other families and have friends, dear friends, or the godparents through adoption. And so we're really grateful for that.
Yeah, that's amazing. I want to end with this last thing. And I feel so honored to have been able to talk to you and for Adoption Now to connect in the work that you're doing. And I was talking to a friend and she's super passionate and she's like, I just feel passionate about so many different things. And I just don't even know how to like hone it down into what God is calling me to do. And I felt like that too, because I'm like that too. Like I love everything and I'm like passionate about everything. And I've stayed in this community for so long because first of all, it's riveting and there's so much to learn. The input and the output of adoption is constantly changing. I am always learning new things. And just when I think I've like got it, then somebody comes in with a different perspective. And I love that about adoption. But I said to her, one of the things that God has taught me about how to narrow down what you're really passionate, what he's actually calling you or inviting you to, is when you start to see other like-minded people being sent to you. And you recognize that, you can put 1,000 to flight, but 2 can put 10,000 to flight. Like when he starts doing that, you start to understand like, this is it. This is the course. This is what we're doing. And I just love Darcy Olson connected us from the Center of the Rights of Abused Children. And she's like that. And Rita Sorenin from the Dave Thomas Foundation, having a passion for adoption, but also for the resources, right? To be successful, not just the door closes when we bring home the child, but we need to help families like forever, right? Like we need to give them solutions and help them and encourage them. And when we talked, it felt like there was just this like common thing that God is doing in adoption in 2025. And I'm so excited to be a part of it. I'm so excited to have met you, because often when you talk to like-minded people, right, you feel less lonely, right? And you feel like you just were like a drink of fresh water. Like you just made my soul so happy, because I'm like, oh my gosh, like God is actually really cares about our community, really not only cares about the children being placed, but like their development and their futures. And I know that seems so trite, like of course, but I love that connection that you and I have, and I appreciate the time that you took with us today.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. It's been such an honor. And I echo back when you find the comrades like in the trenches and you look over, we're doing this together.
Yeah.
Like that's the goal. We know we are not alone. We are not alone in this work. And you are not, if you're listening and you're that family that feels disillusioned, like this was not supposed to go this way, you are not alone. You are not alone. You're not alone in your desires, and your spouse isn't on the same page yet. Like you are not alone. God's love is so particular in how he brings us together and brings timing of our stories at just the right time. And so thank you, April, for your time in Adoption Now. So incredibly grateful for your work and the way that you're stewarding this community. Is just really, really encouraging to my own heart and soul.
Yeah, I hope we can do other things together in the future. But thank you so much. And thank you guys for listening. We will see you next episode. Wasn't that so inspiring? Oh my gosh, I love Show Hope. We love working with them. If you would like more information, go to showhope.org. Hey, don't forget to join Patreon. It's a great community with all of our Adoption Now friends and family. And you know what? We show clips, we have coaching tips, we do Q&A sessions. Check it out at adoptionnowpodcast.com. Thank you for joining us on YouTube. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll see you next episode.
The Adoption Now podcast has been telling adoption stories for nearly a decade, and now's the time to dig a little deeper. Looking for behind-the-scenes content, bonus time with the Fallon family, a network of hundreds of others in the adoption triad, and a chance to influence the content you hear on the show? Join the Patreon community at patreon.com/adoptionnow. Did you know that we also offer one-on-one coaching sessions? Let us help you navigate the early steps or support you post-placement by joining the interest list on our website. And did this episode make an impact on you? Don't forget to share some love. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Adoption Now. See you next episode.
At the end of the day, I choose you.